So I would say avoiding probate's the number one reason.
And where do you think they're getting these notions that probate is this big, awful, horrible thing to avoid?
I think in certain states it is. So for example, Florida is one of those states where probate does cost a lot and it's very expensive to do. And so sometimes they'll be watching the news or watching some sort of business feature on the news, and there'll be a talking head explaining how everybody needs to avoid probate. So here are the ways that you can avoid probate. And they usually, what I've noticed, are pushing things like a revocable trust or adding kids onto the deed to try to avoid probate. And the first thing I want clients to know is probate's not that scary and it's not that expensive. So usually there needs to be another reason why you're wanting to avoid probate. Usually it's not why you're going to do a deed, because like I said, you can avoid probate other ways. So then the next thing that people sometimes will say is, well, we want to cut down on some sort of tax. So Pennsylvania has an inheritance tax, Maryland has an inheritance tax, depending on the relationship to the person who died. So Maryland, direct lineal descendants are exempt, but depending on how far out you go and who's receiving the asset, there might be an inheritance tax. So sometimes people will say, well, I want to reduce the inheritance tax. But the issue with that is, in most states, if you're still residing at the residence, you're not actually avoiding the inheritance tax because the state will still make that entire property subject to inheritance tax because they've caught on to that. So they don't want you just to be able to transfer assets to avoid the tax. So again, it's a question of why are you doing it? If it's to avoid tax, are we actually going to avoid it? And if so, is this the best way? And then the third reason that people will say is they're worried about nursing home costs. And whether or not the nursing home will take the house. And so there's all these misconceptions about what's available if somebody would need nursing home care. How do we protect assets? What assets do we need to protect? And is that the best way to protect the asset?